Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The top story we are tracking this evening. US President Donald Trump has announced that his administration will start sending the tariff letters to countries starting today. The letters will inform these countries what tariff rates they will face. Trump had set July 9 as the deadline to wrap up tariff negotiations and seal trade deals. Speaking to reporters before boarding Air Force One, Trump said these countries will be expected to start paying tariffs from the 1st of August, and the tariffs will range in value from 10% to 70%. He also added that negotiating individual trade deals with over 170 countries is a complex process. This comes at a time where India and the United States are inching closer to sign a mini trade deal next week.
So we're going to start sending letters out to various countries starting tomorrow. We'll probably have 10 or 12 go out tomorrow. And over the next few days, I think by the 9th, they'll be fully covered. And they'll range in value from maybe 60 or 70% tariffs to 10 and 20% tariffs. But they're going to be starting to go out sometime tomorrow. We've done the final form, and it's basically going to explain what the countries are going to be paying in tariffs.
And Atul Kesha, president of the US-India Business Council, and Mukesh Aghi, president USISPF, are hopeful of an interim trade deal between India and the US. I spoke to both of them earlier this week on the significance of the trade deal and how it can help boost business confidence.
We need to have this deal go through. It's important for optics. It's important for business confidence. It's important for investment and job creation in both directions. So my respectful hope and plea is that we get through whatever moment this is. This is always a case in every tough negotiation where both sides have to really accept that they have to make some compromises and accommodations in order for it to go through. It is my hope that we will push through and make it happen. It is good for both of us.
What would be the Chamber's view on the ideal tariff arrangement under the deal?
Well, look, I mean, the Chamber's view, ideologically and theologically even, is that zero tariffs are the best for ensuring the greatest amount of prosperity and happiness and consumer choice. And so we've been on the record many times about that. If we can get to a point where we have the minimal amount of tariffs between the United States and India, where we also have the minimum amount of non-tariff barriers, because it's not enough simply to reduce your tariffs. You have to be sincere about reducing all kinds of government machinery and bureaucracy and regulations and red tape that would impede the movement of goods, despite having a low tariff regime. So if both governments can come sincerely to a point where they realize that having truly free trade between the United States and India is good for both of us. It helps grow our economies faster. It's good for consumers. It increases consumer choice. It catalyzes growth in both countries. It creates new opportunities. Then I think we will have really, truly served our countries well with such a deal.
Ambassador, will we see a 10% tariff as a starting point of the interim trade deal?
So, look, this is something that the trade negotiators have to figure out, right? And they need to be able to have their negotiations in private in order to come to a deal that they can then take to their leaders for ultimate approval. And it is best when such negotiation is done in private. And I actually commend both sides, America and India, for doing so much of this important business in private. We are two very large democratic nations. Leaks are always an issue, but I feel that these negotiations have been very disciplined. So here's where I look at it. Business people, executives, investment committees of large firms, Indian or American, want predictability. They want to know that if they're going to invest $5 billion in a semiconductor plant, or they're going to invest $8 billion in a critical mineral capability, that they have a predictable, stable, transparent, very clear regulatory and tax and tariff regime. And if they can have that predictability, then it's very easy to go to an investment committee and say, we've run the numbers, this is what makes sense, we should move ahead. One of the many reasons I left government is that I wanted to make sure that we could achieve the potential of the US-India economic relationship. Predictability is very important. If this trade agreement, if completed, and I very much hope it will be, offers that predictability, even if there is a baseline tariff in both directions, business can price that in. as long as it stays very predictable.
India has kept agri and dairy out of all trade deals. Will US respect India's sensitivities?
So I can't speak for the US government. I don't know what their thinking is and their insight is at this moment, but here's my perspective. India is a country that has made enormous strides in growing its economy, in uplifting the poorest segment of society, in transforming the lives of Indian people so much for the better compared to what I saw in the 1970s, 80s, 90s coming to India. All of that's good. But it is also true that the Indian agricultural sector not only employs an enormous proportion of the population of India, but also represents an increasingly smaller proportion of the GDP of India. And if you contrast that with agriculture in Brazil or in America or in other places around the world, India hasn't had the waves of modernization that other countries have had. And it has been at a certain, it has certainly ensured a certain political stability and predictability, which is very important in a country with hundreds of millions of people in the agricultural economy. But it also hasn't facilitated innovation that would actually increase incomes, farm incomes, help people transition into more efficient ways of living and ways of working. And so, in a way, if India were to look at this as an opportunity to inject a measure of innovation into its agricultural economy in a way that can actually catalyze growth of revenue, economic growth, help people transition into higher skilled jobs, it could actually be viewed as a positive. And, there's been some attempts at agricultural reform in the past, and India is a very complicated democracy. I respect the challenges of all of that. But I see this as potentially making a benefit and a blessing out of a trade negotiation. And you've seen other countries do this in the past with trade negotiations. So let's see what comes of it. But I do think that a little bit of pressure may be helpful in this case.
So far, the Trump administration has been able to only close deal with UK, which is not a substantive deal as compared to India. So from that perspective, everybody is keen to ensure, but it's going to be an interim deal. It's not going to be a final deal because some of the bigger issues, such as agriculture, such as dairy, such as GMO, they will come in part two. But part one is let's close the deal, get the business moving forward, and bring in more certainty rather than having an uncertain environment between the two countries.
Right. We've been speaking to sources in the Indian government through the day, Mr. Aghi, and what they indicate, there is still a stalemate as far as India's sensitivities on agriculture and dairy are concerned. We're pushing hard for concessions and greater market access, a competitive edge for India's labor-intensive sectors. From the Indian side, it seems that agriculture and dairy are the red lines, and the US is still pushing for them to be included in the early harvest deal as well. And the indication that we're getting that India may walk away from the deal if there is too much insistence on agriculture and dairy. What do you think is the status of negotiations?
Well, yes, the US is asking to open up ag, dairy, GMO. And those are red lines for India itself. You have to understand when you have 60% of the population working on the farm, you have to protect them. From a religious perspective, the dairy which are fed in the US, meats and other kind of food is not acceptable. India, under the law, cannot allow GMO. So I think the government hands are tied. And we are trying to explain to the US government that let's not push hard on that area. Our feeling is that US will focus on getting first interim deal going and then focus on ag, dairy, and others in the latter part of the discussion itself.
Right. So you're saying that we will have an interim deal in goods minus agriculture and dairy. Would you have any idea as to the number of product lines or the kind of product lines which could be covered in the early harvest agreement?
So our estimate shows slightly over 6,000 product lines, which both sides have agreed to move forward. Also, basically, when India has a $40+ billion trade surplus with the US, India will buy more and more LNG from the US to bring that to the balance itself. So I think it addresses multiple factor what Trump is asking for. Balance the trade between the two countries. By India buying LNG, that's going to bring it down. Open up the market. I think the current agreement opens up the market itself, both for the US and India. At the end of the day, I think the objective here is to take the trade between the two countries from 200 billion to 500 billion. And we strongly believe a reciprocal trade deal, a trade deal which is win-win, will drive trade exports from India into the US and from the US into India itself. So I think what we have to focus is it should not be a win-lose deal, but a win-win deal between the two countries.
Right. What I would also like to ask you that what would be the tariff arrangement? Will it be 0 for 0, or US will impose 10% and India will also impose an average tariff of 10%?
Well, when you say reciprocal, that means if the US is going to put 10%, then India should put 10%. You can't have one country at 0, other country at 10 itself. The whole objective of renegotiating a trade deal was early on, where India's weighted average tariff was in double digit and US was in single digit. And the whole objective is to bring parity here. So I think if US insists on 10%, then India will also insist on 10%. But you have to understand that you are dealing with a economy which is India, $4 trillion with a per capita income of $2,000 versus an economy which is $30 trillion with a per capita income of almost $85,000. So I think you have to bring some semblance of parity between the economy and per capita as compared to both countries itself. I think in order to have a win-win deal, you need to ensure that there's a reciprocity between the two countries.
Right. When it comes to steel tariffs, India has been seeking an exemption. But considering that the US has applied these steel tariffs, 25% tariffs on all nations, is there likelihood of any reprieve for India?
Well, it all depends on President Trump. If he basically feels that India is moving the right direction according to his perception, that he may probably say, okay, let's bring it down to either 10 or 26% as per earlier. But you have to understand, India's export on steel is more closer to like few $1 billion. So the impact is not that big. I think what we have to focus is making sure that our pharma goods are zero, our basically handicrafts, especially jewelry and gems, which is like almost $9 billion exports, are protected. So those are the areas we should need to focus on. Yes, steel is important. And we are seeing that US is putting major tariff on Canadian, European, and Japanese steel. So it'll be exception if India gets it down to 10%, but let's wait and watch.
Time for a short break, but coming up, Prime Minister Modi is currently on a 5-nation tour in 8 days. This is his longest foreign visit in the last 10 years. More details in just a bit.